My name is Andrew Reagan. I'm the executive director of Clean Energy for America, a nonprofit devoted to supporting the clean energy workforce and advocating for policies to advance a just and equitable and rapid decarbonization. We're so excited to have this panel today. I don't want to waste any more time talking about them, but just very quickly, with the Inflation Reduction Act, the opportunities it provides, especially in national security and jobs for veterans. We're excited to have a panel of experts, veterans, and folks who work in clean energy to come talk about this. Without further ado, I want to toss it to our moderator, Army veteran, clean energy industry leader, and many other hats, Kevin Johnson, who is graciously agreed to moderate. So Kevin, thank you so much for joining us.
Andrew, thank you so much, and really appreciate the opportunity to join here and moderate discussion with this esteemed panel. It's really humbling to ask and receive a response from such a great group that represent a good cross-sectioning of veterans and national security leaders that have been acting on climate for a good part of their careers. We're going to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act, its impact on our national security, but also on the job side. What are we doing? What are people working on? And what is that transition pathway for folks that are looking to enter this sector? So thank you all for joining us. As noted, Kevin Johnson, I serve as a board director for the Environmental Defense Action Fund. Been in clean energy for about 15 years, co-founded a few businesses, and been very fortunate to work closely with our panelists here in different capacities over the past few years. So quick intros joining me here. First is Sharon Burke. Sharon is the founder and president of EcoSpherics. Prior to that, Sharon served as a former Assistant Secretary of Defense, really leading the department forward on all things energy and climate, especially around the operational energy space. So Sharon, thank you so much for joining us. Also have Michael Callender. Michael is an Army veteran and serves as the Director of Fleet Operations for Highland Electric Fleets. Highland is an innovative electric vehicle company focused on electric school buses, as well as other fleet electrification efforts. So Mike, thanks for joining us. Last but not least is Kevin Dolphin, a fellow Army veteran, and serves as a Chief Commercial Officer for Clean Energy Services, focusing on the O&M space for wind, solar, and battery storage. So really, really look forward to the conversation today. So I think we'll hop right into it and get into the questions. And we'll start with Sharon. So Sharon, as the first Assistant Secretary of Defense for Operational Energy, you supported 3 Secretaries of Defense, as well as the Undersecretary for Acquisitions, Technology, and Logistics. You've been engaged in this important work for many years at the most senior and strategic levels for the United States government. Could you describe, from your perspective, the importance of this Inflation Reduction Act and its impact on our national security and the impacts on climate and clean energy efforts?
Thanks, Kevin. It is great to be here with you. And I got to say, Army strong on this panel. So it's great to be with all of you. I think when we talk about climate change and energy and national security, this moment it's almost overwhelming how apparent that these issues are as a matter of national security, in the most visceral sense of your day-to-day life and, the future for your children. So if you just look around the world right now, it is truly alarming what's happening. And the fact is that climate change effects and impacts are happening faster than we expected and faster than models projected. Just in this country, the latest news this morning, there's been news after news all summer about extreme heat, about fires, about floods. But just today, we have Jackson, Mississippi is under a boil water order. You cannot drink the water in the capital city of Mississippi, right? Because of years of underspending, of environmental justice concerns, but also because of catastrophic floods. Both their sewer and their treatment, their supply system have failed. This is happening right here in our own country. That's 180,000 people who are directly affected by this. But look half a world away, and Pakistan, if you haven't seen the images coming out of Pakistan of the apocalyptic flooding that's happening there, you should take a look, because there is nothing that will put more sort of urgency in your heart about what we need to do here than the fact that 50 million people, the estimate is, are going to be displaced in Pakistan. It's hard to wrap your mind around what that's going to mean, but it's also China is having catastrophic effects with river systems drying up, hydropower not working, factories are having to shutter because they can't get electricity. You've seen these pictures out of France and Germany. Ships can't get up the river. This is happening right here, right now. And then on top of that, the other side of this equation, we've got a major war in the heart of Europe with Russia as one of the big energy producers in the world, and Ukraine as a mineral and energy producer. And it is just shaking global energy markets. As long as we rely on fossil fuels, this is the vulnerability that we are signing up for. The twin vulnerabilities of climate change and being at the mercy of autocrats that own the markets. So here we are, this is where we are. And this new act, together with the bipartisan infrastructure law, with American Rescue Act, with a number of other initiatives, the Defense Production Act, it can change the game. It's changing the way we produce energy, the way we use energy. And this is from soup to nuts. And I know we'll all talk about this more, but if you look at the Inflation Reduction Act, you'll see that it's talking about clean energy production, which is really great, and putting significant resources into producing. And I think the estimate is it's going to make all told a 40% reduction in emissions. But it's also putting like at least $2 billion into breakout energy at the national labs. So innovation is a really important piece of this. But the other thing that I think is really important in this bill is that it puts money in the value chain. So it's not just a question of making sure we have solar on rooftops. It's making sure that we have the materials, the critical minerals, the manufacturing, the processing, the ability to make batteries, because right now we are really vulnerable across the board. So this is about our economic security, our national security, our environmental security, and it's going to create jobs and put our economy on different footing.
Sharon, thanks so much for that. I mean, that's a perfect setup and framework for the stakes and what's happening locally, internationally, as well as that. You're right; it's not just the Inflation Reduction Act. There's so many other pieces of the puzzle that come together over the past few months after years and years of work from many fronts to get there. And you hit on things that happen internationally. My time in service overseas in Iraq is definitely what propelled me into the clean energy sector about 15 years ago. And I'd love to get the perspective of Kevin and Mike, from your perspective as veterans. What propelled you into this sector, and maybe you could hit on a little bit of what you're working on from your respective fields, maybe starting with Kevin first.
Sure. Thanks for having me. This is really important. I always think of energy security as national security, and that goes back to my time in the military. We used to try to secure the area by giving out diesel to run generators so they had some cool air in Iraq, and just seeing what energy poverty means at the extremes. As well as, we were really there for one reason. There's one strategic reason to be in that area. And I just think, to Sharon's point, once we can reshore a lot of that production, the manufacturing, the generation, we exit the, cycle, the boom bust cycle of commodity global supply chains, which we're stuck with fossil fuels. So for me, leaving the military, looking for a job in corporate America, I had no idea about renewables. Met a wind company, which would later become EDPR, North America. But it was just amazing as I'm researching for that initial job interview. Wow, this is how electricity gets in my phone. I can't believe this is how this works. I never questioned it. Oh, and by the way, it's all about to change. So it was like two aha moments stacked on top of each other. And just thinking about how exciting it was to see something that had been around for 100 years change so radically, and to be a part of that and how that influences our national security, that's always gotten me excited about this. And then to be in a position to where we're making a lot of hires to put blue collar workers into the field in these rural communities. I mean, a lot of people that are aligned with climate change, but their economic incentive is based off of something that is threatened by addressing climate change. And so, that mixed match of this is where I make my money, but this is what I believe is the right thing to do. If we can align those with more jobs in the energy transition, I think this is just going to move so much faster because people want to do work in this space. They just don't always know how to find ways to pay their mortgage to feed their kids. And we can do that together.
Fantastic. We're going to dig a bit more into the specifics of what you're working on here in a little bit. But Mike, why don't you jump in and share a little bit about your transition and kind of what propelled you to do what you're doing at Highland?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kevin. I actually my time in service is what generated my interest to come to the clean energy sector. So I had a laser focused transition, and two key experiences while in the military and the Army kind of informed my decision. My first was I spent time in Ukraine back in 2015 when energy access and security was becoming the real deal. It was so clear back then that Russia had a stranglehold. So I started researching. The more I learned about the issues, the more I learned about the possible solutions: wind, solar, hydrogen, the other technologies that we've already discussed. And I was hooked. I saw it as Kevin said, a form of national security, energy independence, access, and security. My final role in the Army was actually leading a fleet of horses, which are almost zero emission, vehicle fleets. But that was an Army, the Army caisson platoon down in Arlington National Cemetery. So I got to live the horse and buggy era and kind of saw the convergence of where energy and mobility were going. Saw that, went off to graduate school, paid for by the GI Bill, and found my way to fleet electrification as a service. And you learn so much from your time in the military that you don't necessarily realize is really valuable insights and skills. For example, at Highland, we're pretty focused on K-12 school bus fleet electrification. And a couple months in, I've been looking at yellow buses everywhere, and I couldn't get the memory out of my mind going through Ranger School on school buses everywhere, right? Basic training around school buses. So it sparked a initiative, and that's turned into a full focus of Highland, a subset of identifying the federal fleet as a very viable way to change.
So Mike, picking up on that a little bit, that's a fantastic, story, and Kevin as well. How you saw some pieces from your time in service and where you could apply them in the sector that was motivating you. And pick up on the national security aspect. You mentioned the fleet electrification, and as you're aware, the federal fleet is one of the largest fleet in the world. Maybe we could touch a bit on some of the opportunities that you see in this sector, and how Highland's approaching that, in how the Inflation Reduction Act has impacted your outlook in that sector.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to start there. So if you think about how DoD, federal government, kind of looks at climate change, it's mitigation of the effects, and then how do you adapt to what's already happening or going to happen. And as the largest fleet in the world, you can do the most good for mitigation, getting internal combustion engines off the road and replacing them with these. The adaptation piece, I think, is really interesting. And we have focused a lot on vehicle to grid or vehicle to building, vehicle to micro technologies, specifically around medium and heavy duty vehicles, which the federal fleet has over 5,000 large school buses for various reasons. And each of those is about 200 kilowatt hours of dispatchable storage. So in aggregate, you can have over a gigawatt hour of mobile dispatchable storage that can back up your grid, back up critical infrastructure and batteries. And we think that resilient, adaptive effort is a major value driver. And if the federal government invests in these technologies, it's a very dual use asset in all sense of the word. You're getting mobile energy storage, but also accelerating the ability for the civilian market to adapt to these technologies as well.
That's great. And you're touching on a lot of key points around resilience, and maybe coming back towards Sharon. As noted at the top, right? You're definitely no stranger to the operational energy demand of the Department of Defense. The largest in the world. Maybe you could expand a bit on what Mike mentioned. What are the challenges, opportunities you see in electrifying the federal fleet, and has your view changed at all in light of the Inflation Reduction Act being passed?
Well, so the federal fleet, a big chunk of the federal fleet is in the postal service, and that's been in motion, so shall we say. But about 180,000 non-tactical vehicles, and I'll explain what that means, are in the Department of Defense. So DoD has a lot of different kinds of vehicles, right? You know, they have Abrams tanks, which is a very specialized kind of vehicle that's made for military missions. But they also, if you go to any military base, you're going to see a lot of regular old cars, private vehicles, but also light duty trucks. And the Department of Defense leases or buys those through the General Services Administration, but they're cars just like any other car in the United States. The Biden administration has set some targets for the Department of Defense to turn that entire fleet, and again, that's 180,000 at least vehicles, over to low emission, zero emission vehicles, so electric vehicles. The question for the Department of Defense, you know, when you're talking about an organization that has, you know, 500,000 structures that it owns or manages, and something like 28 million acres under management, is less about the vehicles and more about the infrastructure. And how do you actually build charging infrastructure? And the thing that's great about this is that in figuring out how to make this a win for the military services, it also can be a win-win for the communities that host bases. And I think a lot of the, you know, the leadership in the Army and the Air Force and the Navy right now are looking at how to make that happen, how to make this conversion over to electric vehicles something that's a benefit for the communities that support the bases, and also for the function of the bases themselves. Now, there's a whole different, so, you know, the DoD's electricity bill every year is about $4 billion, right? So that would all come on that side of the business. But their fuel bill, depending on the price of oil, can be anywhere from $10 to $20 billion a year. And that's a lot of airplanes. The number one consumer there is airplanes, but it's also big heavy vehicles and ships. That's where the real fuel use comes in. And electrifying there is not quite as easy, because you know how, you know, the car that's sitting in your driveway is used. You know your patterns, you know, your commute to work, if you have one these days, if your commute to work is probably well within the range of an electric vehicle, it really lends itself to that. That's true for a military base too. But when you're talking about a heavy duty combat vehicle that's designed to be in a war situation, what does electrification mean there? So that's something also that the Department of Defense is getting its arms around. And to be clear, there are defense companies that have been researching hybrid vehicles and electrification of tactical warfighting vehicles for years, for decades, because it's a performance benefit, right? So, but the question is just then, how do you power a battlefield? It's a really different model. And for people who are like, oh, we couldn't possibly do that, we would have to recharge things. Well, I mean, again, I think you've heard both of our speakers allude to this. You still have to refuel things on a battlefield. And that means moving fuel, which is heavy and takes up a lot of space, through, you know, long distances sometimes, and through war zones, and to do it constantly. So fueling is already difficult on the battlefield. It's just a question of how can we make a change to a more electrified force in a way that makes us a better military, because it's always going to be mission driven. It's going to come back to that. And I think that all of the armed forces are getting their arms around that right now in a variety of ways.
Sharon, you hit on a few points that, you know, are near and dear to my heart, right? You know, having served in Iraq 04 to 05, it, you know, is daunting to see that logistical chain, and, you know, the amount of convoy combat deaths we faced, just moving fuel around the battlefield, right? So, you know, as noted from the top, that's what propelled me into this space. And, you know, those challenges in tactical fleet are very, very challenging. But as Mike noted, you know, and you noted as well, that the garrison fleet around the world, really around the country, is massive. It's a massive opportunity to electrify the non-tactical fleet, right? The buses, the privately owned vehicles on our post installations, which are a huge cost to the taxpayer and a huge opportunity to innovate within. We're gonna add one more thing there.
I was just going to say, think about your time in Iraq. It wasn't just that, or, and also for our colleagues who were in Afghanistan, it wasn't just that it was difficult to move all that fuel under fire on the battlefield. Think about where the fuel was coming from. In Afghanistan, it was Russian fuel coming through all of Central Asia and down into a country that doesn't have good roads, or it was Persian Gulf fuel coming through Pakistan, all the way through Pakistan. So, the fact that it wasn't what we would call maneuver warfare, it was, relatively light demand for fuel compared to the kind of war that's happening in Ukraine right now, meant that we could do it. But think about that picture and what a challenge that is for our national security.
Absolutely. And, again, appreciate your leadership, really helping move the department over the past, decade, in the public sector, and then now in the private sector at EcoSpherix, to help advise and assist, our warfighters and our folks here at home move the department forward. So those problems can seem so daunting and so overwhelming, and for folks in the audience listening, some of the veterans maybe listening saying, okay, what can I do with this? I mean, there's the challenges are so big. What could I as an individual or my small company do? And I want to turn towards Kevin Dolphin and maybe shifting away from the electric vehicle topic a little bit, maybe to power generation. And want to just kind of get your perspective from what you're doing at Clean Energy Services, maybe to learn a little bit more about what you're doing, kind of what your company does, and where do you see the opportunities for veterans in this space like yourself that are kind of in transition or thinking about moving into the energy sector?
Yeah, no, thank you. For a guy who's in charge of sales, I'm the worst salesman ever for my own company. So we provide O&M services, basically at post-construction maintenance activities for utility scale renewable assets. So like we were talking to a company out of California today, and we're rushing some people to California to go commission an energy storage project that's behind on getting commissioned because, the OEM is short-staffed. And, the thing that we've been seeing that's been driving our investment thesis is it's a tight labor market. And this is a huge opportunity. If you're familiar with the oil and gas markets, it's very similar actually to the 1960s when oil and gas started to outpace coal as a primary power generation source. And you saw the energy companies divesting their service activity away from the exploration and production. We see renewables really doing that. They've been vertically integrated up until this point out of necessity, not out of desire. And what that means at large for the workforce is it's a huge opportunity to really get in there where our industry has really been focused on growth, right? Get steel in the ground, get another project. The origination was hard, the PPAs were hard, the development and leasing were hard. And now we have a big bank of projects, but now we need to make sure that they're generating at capacity, at target, and they're operationally efficient and effective. And this is where I think military veterans come in really great, because project excellence is really baked into our blood. And so if you look at companies like Vestas, which is one of the top OEMs for the wind space, one of the original equipment manufacturers, 60% of their workforce that are veterans are in the field. And so there's this huge opportunity, especially with the new apprenticeship programs under the IRA. 15% of the labor force that's going to be on commissioning and constructing these projects across, all types of, wind, solar, and storage are going to need to be apprenticeship. And that is a really great entry path for, middle enlisted, the E3 to E6 that are trying to come out and find a really great place, but need that stability pathway to transition their careers. Apprenticeship is going to be a really strong mechanism to get them into the industry. And once they're in, they're going to move up quickly utilizing those soft skills they developed in the military. So I see the field side of what's going on to be a rapidly expanding growth opportunity to get into the industry. Even if they don't stay in the field and they move upper management, that experience, that hands-on is just a really great place to break into a new industry.
Yeah, that's great. I'm happy you hit on that. Yeah, the apprenticeship point wouldn't have been something that would have come right to the top of my mind. But for the folks listening on the call that are dissecting all the nuances of the Inflation Reduction Act, which there is a lot in there. I mean, it's a tremendous amount of opportunity in that bill, and so it's a lot to digest. But like you said, one of the key things that with the tax credits for wind, solar, battery storage, and other technologies, the carrot out there is a tax incentive. But the stick there is the use of prevailing wage labor union labor, payment rates, and the implementation of apprenticeship programs. A lot of folks are very familiar with prevailing wage, but these apprenticeship programs are new. And to get the full 30% ITC versus a 6% baseline, folks out there with large pipelines projects really need to get familiar with these apprenticeship programs because they're going to be kind of a requirement. And like you said, opportunities for veterans in that space are really phenomenal with the numbers of the hundreds of thousands that are transitioning annually. So I appreciate you raising that. Mike, Sharon, from your perspective, maybe starting with Mike, sticking the jobs topic. Mike, you're in the mobility space versus power generation space. What opportunities do you see for veterans, maybe from your perspective?
Unlimited is the short answer. I mean, the mobility space is exploding, and you can't hire talent enough. And veterans bring a lot of skills and experience that I think are incredibly valuable to the mobility space. I mean, as Kevin said, you have all these natural tendencies, with ingrained sense of mission completeness, finding the answer no matter what's going on. But in the actual business of getting projects completed, you end up really having to deal with all sorts of government entities on the other side, or even on your side, regulators, municipalities, permitting, unions, all these bureaucracies that in the military you really learn kind of an innate sense of how to navigate and build coalitions for support while bringing everybody new. So I think there's no job too small or too large for veterans to get involved with. Apprenticeship is a great space, and there's so many opportunities on the private sector and as well as the public sector.
I totally agree. And shift to Sharon, because not everyone is a veteran, right? There's a lot of folks that serve our country in public service and national security roles that look at this space, and a lot of times these things are geared towards veterans or military spouses. I'd love to get your perspective in this this path forward. Where do you see opportunities for folks in the national security space?
Well, I think there are opportunities certainly in the private sector, and everything from consulting to finance to to the research and development to the actual manufacturing and distribution of the technologies and these systems. All those things are creating jobs. But I also want to put in a plea for government itself, because we're talking about the administration has put 300 or more billion dollars into play here, and this is an incredibly worthy cause, and it's going to take a lot of work, hard work, to implement that and to get it out the door. And we need smart, creative people who are motivated by the mission to get involved in the civilian side of the government and figure out how we're actually going to make this happen. And as I said, our it's not just our future that depends on it, like our right now depends on getting this done and getting it done right. So it's always, as a former civil servant myself, with a really true belief in public service, I really like to see good people going back into public service and making sure that these things get done right, because it's certainly worth it. Also, just as far as the jobs, one of the things I really like about this bill, and this bill taken together with the bipartisan infrastructure bill, is that it's not just about, oh, okay, we're going to inject some money into the solar, industry, as worthy as that is. This is a vision for how we reinvigorate American manufacturing and how we bring our economy back, not just back, but forward into a different kind of 21st century manufacturing. So these bills look at everything. They look at what kinds of infrastructure we need in order to succeed. And that's jobs, because building that infrastructure, figuring out what it looks like is jobs. But it's also about mining and minerals and processing and building batteries and innovating batteries and, and about vehicles and airplanes. It's about all of it. And so it's that full value chain that's addressed in these bills. And together with the American Rescue Act and a couple of other really key pieces of legislation. So this is about a whole different vision for the American economy. We've let way too many things get away from us, It's made us vulnerable and it's drained the jobs out of our economy. This is bringing it home. So there are jobs on all, if you look at it as a core sample, on all elements of that value chain, from the laboratory to the end user. So that's what I really like about what we've done here, is that this is about a new vision for the American economy.
I think that's extremely well said, and I'll make a comment on that. But before I do, before we wrap up, the moderated questions here, if anyone has any additional questions you'd like to add to the Q&A, I see some that have been posted here, and I see some responses to those questions. But if there's any others, please go ahead and drop them in there to the Q&A. Now would be a good time, and we'll pick those up here in a second. And just to echo, Sharon, you're saying, getting good folks to either join the government, the public sector, and or to support the public sector. I see a lot of folks on the line here that I know pretty well, and I know several of you are not very familiar with how to engage with the government, whether it be the Department of Defense in that space or the Department of Energy in what they're doing. But as you noted, these bills combined really put a whole of government approach and really amazing opportunities out there. But you have to engage with folks in that space in order to really fully maximize the opportunity for yourself and for your respective potential company. And I was very fortunate. I'm here in a personal capacity, but have recently found a pathway for myself to give back and support a bit to the Department of Energy's Loan Program Office to help bring more commercial approaches to the market. And it's thank you. And see a little celebratory thing there. And what's been fascinating for me to see is the amount of enthusiasm to reshore manufacturing in this country. Conversations about investments, massive investment opportunities out there, which is surely going to spur a tremendous amount of job opportunities and investment opportunities around the country. So it's been a very interesting period of time. Before we go to the audience Q&A, maybe just wrap the moderated Q&A questions here with just questions about things you're involved in that have helped you navigate the path. So Kevin, maybe coming to you first. We talked a lot offline over the past few months, and I know you're very involved with various initiatives and efforts, not just the veteran ones, but other energy, clean energy initiatives. What's helped you along your pathway, and what would you recommend to folks out there that are either veterans or folks out there that aren't veterans are looking to engage more efficiently with veterans that are looking to enter the clean energy space?
Yeah, I think the big thing is really finding that community that are trying to go the same place you are. So in Houston, we didn't have something like that. So we have, I got lucky to be part of the founding of the Renewable Energy Alliance, the first trade group for renewables in Houston. But if you don't have something, go find what already exists before you build it. But there's a ton of stuff that's out there. So, there's the Clean Tech Leaders Roundtable that works nationally. Like, we've got a dinner coming up in a couple of weeks that we sold out last week, and that's for 80 executives in Houston that are focused on clean energy. With ACP, the American Clean Power Association, I'm talking to them right now about how do we integrate more veterans events with, their upcoming conference schedule? How do we get more integration with the veteran resource groups at these major employers? Dan Mish over at Invenergy, who's director of asset management, but also runs the Veterans Advanced Energy Project under the Atlantic Council. That's a really great fellowship that I just was lucky enough to finish up and saw Kevin at, their annual summit. But that's an annual summit that you can go to every August. But I also encourage the applications are open for that fellowship. It's a year-long fellowship. It's a webinar once a month, as well as some additional cohort and team building and mentorship, peer mentorship. It's a terrific program. Also kind of exposes you to the advocacy side. It's something that I'd never really been exposed to, but I know I wanted to be in something related to veterans and renewables. I was like, yeah, sure, sign me up. The solar industry under SEIA and the Solar Foundation has the Solar Ready Vets program, which is helping in that apprenticeship side of moving veterans from active duty into the solar camp. So, there's tons of these activities. And so I wouldn't, if you're a veteran, don't get limited to only looking for veteran initiatives. Find things that are around that other affinity of renewables and energy transition. And then you might find those veterans inside of that And once you identify yourself, it becomes a lot easier. You know, that's my affinity group. But for whatever it is that you're really tightly identify with, I guarantee you there's something in this space for you. And everybody here has such a growth mindset, a positive, help one another lift up, not pull down, that you're going to quickly accelerate by getting plugged into a community and not working alone.
Yeah, that's great. You know, it's great seeing you here in Chicago for the Veterans Advanced Energy Project. You know, appreciate your flash talk and your thoughts and what you shared with the group there. And really fascinating to see, you know, yourself, you know, see you move, you know, so quickly through the space and become an anchor there in Texas for the veteran community and clean energy. So really appreciate what you're doing out there. And, you know, as I turn to Mike to ask me some of his thoughts, and then to Sharon, I'd also highlight that Clean Energy for America, Andrew and team have done, you know, tremendous work. Right here, we are convening together with some great folks in the audience that, you know, I'm not going to name check anybody, but some, you know, really, you know, key folks that have been leading this stuff for 10, 15 years, and both in the government sector and I see some folks in the finance sector that I know are, you know, very gracious of the time to join us for this. And so Clean Energy for America has been a great organization to bring a lot of these things together, and has put together the face of clean energy to really put the voices out there to share stories that hang online on the website, as well as convenings like this. So, you know, hat tip to Andrew and the team for bringing this together and your work on the veterans space. Mike, coming your way, what's helped you, you know, stay connected in this space, and how can folks benefit from that?
Yeah, I think Kevin and both Kevin's named some really great resources organizations. It's all about finding communities. I'll add one additional coalition. The Electrification Coalition has a great, recently created group of vets for EVs. So if you're interested in the mobility space, it's a lot of like-minded veterans and non-veterans focused on how do we create momentum for EVs as a national security asset. So that's what I've been involved in. The other one that every veteran has access to is the Military Alumni Network. I think it's the strongest network of people looking to help others that have been in their shoes. So just reach out, and you'll never know what you learn or who you meet until you start to network. People they've been in your shoes, they've been in the transition, and they're looking to help you and find those communities and resources.
Mike, that's great. And, you know, turning last year, you know, to Sharon, who, you know, knowing you long enough, a lot of these programs emanate from your leadership. You know, so I really appreciate you taking the time, you know, to share with us. So I'd love it from your perspective. You know, you've been seeing these things ebb and flow for a while. You know, what do you see as most effective in the national security space organizationally that you would turn folks towards that may be a good resource for them?
Well, I think what Kevin and Michael have already named a bunch of things that people should look at. And, you know, in the past, the Truman Project has been a good network as well. I like the Atlantic Council Veterans for Energy Project. I think it's a great innovation. I think also on the adaptation side of climate change, there's a lot of interesting work where people, again, I think it really answers a need that a lot of veterans feel to have your hands in a problem. I'm a big fan of Rubicon. I think they're a great organization, and that's a veterans organization that gets involved in disaster relief. And, you know, that's a growing need, and the Red Cross as well at a community level. And I do think a lot of the changes that need to happen start at a community level. So, you know, we can't get where we need to be as a nation unless we start building it in our neighborhoods and in our communities. So I would strongly encourage veterans to get engaged at a local level, you know, on climate change and on energy, and start there, because it doesn't go anywhere unless we start right there. But other than that, I also think I would encourage everyone, the Department of Energy and the Department of Defense, but especially the Department of Energy has notifications that you can sign up for, whether it's the Loans Program Office or the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office, ARPA-E. As they have opportunities, they're not hiding them from you. They're putting them out there. And there's just a lot more to come. So one of the problems is that right now, if you ask me, how can I get my hands on those billions of dollars? I don't know. And I'm not sure anybody really does, other than what's already been announced, because because the government is trying to figure out how to move these resources. So it's really important that you sign up for those notifications so that you can see when things are coming available. And again, we're talking about significant amounts of money, and they're not going to hide it from you, and they want to make it easy for you. I also am a big fan of RISE, which is a consortium that our friend Mike Wu put together. So the Department of Defense, you can set up these things, consortium sounds like a nice word, but it's actually also a legal entity that has a contract mechanism at the heart of it. RISE is an energy and climate consortium, the Department of Defense consortium that's new. It's still getting its contracts in place. But once that's fully set up, it'll have a contract mechanism in place that'll allow companies that are members it'll make it easier for them to do business with the Department of Defense. So I'm a big fan of that. And there are participants in that, like the Defense Innovation Unit, that are there in order to make non-traditional performers have an easier point of entry with the Department of Defense. So right now, RISE is mostly about an information exchange, but it hopefully soon it'll also have a contract mechanism at the heart of it.
Sure, that's great. And I took note here, 41 minutes. I was trying to figure out how long it would take us to mention the great Mr. Mike Wu and/or John Powers or any of the folks that have are always in the wings doing great things. And I note that in just in the connectivity of this space, that it's been fun to have been in this sector for a long enough time, but to see some of the challenges previously, to see the opportunities at Bay, and then with Mike and Kevin coming in here to the sector over the past few years, great to see the generation we have behind us that are doing some really, really fun, innovative things, trying to find ways to monetize those opportunities, as you noted. I'll foot stomp on some of the funding opportunity announcements out there. They can be challenging to know what's happening, but highly recommend to keep track of those things, because there is a massive movement of capital flowing from these bills, and you need to be well positioned in order to move those things forward. So thank you for noting those two things. So we're going to wrap here in just a minute or two. I see a couple questions. So maybe let's go through quick lightning round. I see it was already answered, but Mike, from your perspective on electrification, charging stations around the country, what do you say is the over under on the timeline of getting to charging stations around the country? How do you view that, Nyland?
It's a massive task. We think the first sector to go in electrification should be fleets. They're the most uniform, the most condensed, the most predictable, and you kind of know where they're going to be utilized at a given time. That's why we're focused on school bus. They're going on a couple hours a day, predetermined routes, pretty low route length, so it makes sense. As far as public charging network, there's a ton of emphasis there. It's outside of my realm of expertise, but I think the focus on zero emission corridors is really going to states on the state basis. It'll take time, but I think the most growth will be in the fleet sector in the urban years.
Appreciate that. The last question to Mr. Dolphin, a word of advice, for folks, veterans, non-veterans, I see folks in the finance sector, what words of advice did you give from your vantage point here, in light of the Inflation Reduction Act and other bills passed?
Yeah, I would just say, as you're trying to make a career transition either up or over into renewables and energy transition, just be curious and be humble. That's the best way that you can get in, make friends, and learn. It's probably the best thing I ever did. Luckily, I'm a dumb infantry guy, so that just could right down the fairway. There was no pretending otherwise. But just be curious, ask a lot of questions, follow your curiosity with the things that excite you, and then just be really humble and listen to other people. You're going to hear different perspectives, some of which you agree with, some of which you don't. Some things are going to be antagonizing, some things aren't. My favorite comment when somebody goes, that climate change isn't real, or renewables only is funded by the government. Agree to disagree. Anyway, hey, you know what? And then we just talk about something else.
Appreciate that. No, humility, I think, is definitely a key watchword. And Sharon, I will give you, of course, the closing word here. And you've demonstrated humility and your grace with your time for so long. We call you Sharon, just the Honorable Mrs. Burke. Get a 4-star general equivalent, the flag there behind you. And I know you don't wear those badges when you engage. So thank you so much for taking your time and sharing it with us. I know some of our attendees have noted you specifically, of course. So I'd love to give you the closing word before we turn it back to Andrew to wrap us up.
Well, Kevin, that's very nice of you to say. And I was like, yeah, kiss the ring. But the truth is that the kind of work I do now, now that I'm a private citizen, I do policy research and advising, and it's a real honor for me to be able to work with companies that are in the mix. But it's you guys that are the real heroes here, because you actually are trying to build the technologies and make these things work on the ground. I'm just reading about what you do. So while I appreciate that comment, for me, it's exciting and humbling to talk to be on a panel with the three of you. And that's, that's really what this comes down to, is that, it's almost easy to look at everything that's happening, certainly on climate change, and get overwhelmed and get a sense of futility, or even that there's nothing we can do. But I feel like we have this moment now where there's so much we can do. And now we've got this big investment, and it's not everything. We need to do more, but we've been given an opportunity to prove that this works. This works for Americans. This works for jobs. This works for our economy. This works for our future. We've been given a big opportunity here to prove that this is not only necessary, but it works, and that we don't have to be afraid and just worry that there's nothing we can do. There's so much we can do. So for the three of you, I really appreciate the chance to be on a panel with you, because you are the ones that are making it happen. And I thank you for that, because that's where it starts. That's the middle, and that's the end, is people like you making it happen. So keep doing that.
Well, Sharon, I could not agree more. I'm so grateful to you, to both Kevins, to Michael for all joining us today. And thank you to all the attendees. We're really excited to continue putting on engaging programming, continue to advocate for positive legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act and others in the future. So really appreciate our panelists' time, our attendees as well. I hope you all have a great Tuesday, and thank you so much for joining us. Bye-bye.